first to establish newspapers in India, catering to a small English educated elite first, and then large audience in the vernacular languages later. The opposition might have a point regarding censorship on all the newspapers. Yes, but if you consider the fact that censorship is not all bad, free speech idealists agree that the solution to bad speech is not censorship but more speeches. But bad speech can and often does drown out all good. If you consider the next point, you can't deny that British gave us tea, cricket, and the English language. The British desire to end the dependence on Chinese tea, prompting them to set up plantations in India and increased economy of Indian plantations of tea. Now, if we talk about the Indian diplomat and politician Shashi Tharoor, he has recently called for Great Britain to pay reparations to India and its former colonies in a debate at Oxford Union. Well, it is for both the left and right. It often cast an anti-British and anti-colonial times.
Point of
And
information.
influenced by the narratives, I'll take it after my speech. Thank you. Influence.
Yeah, continue.
Uh, these ideas have had elements of truth and extravagation in them. Despite the appeal of these ideas, it does not make sense for Britain to pay reparations to India for reasons I outlined below. Firstly, I disagree with the characterization of colonialism that it leads to such calls in the first place. History is, among other things, the story of the rise and fall of states and empires, and by their nature, politics and state building always help and hurt certain groups. In an empire or after conquest by an empire, there are always privileged elites, collaborations, people who live, don't change at all, and groups that have the worst of it. This is a phenomenon not limited to colonialization and European imperialization, which is why I strongly disagree to the cast Western imperialization as a uniquely immoral, when in fact all imperial projects, including the Mongols, Arabs, Western empires, were a mixed bag. The only substantive difference between Western imperialization and what came prior to it was the fact Western colonization occurred in tandem and an industrial and scientific and political revolution, all of which eventually shook up non-Western societies in an unprecedented way. Then why only Britain has been asked to pay reparation to India? Why not different conquerors? Why not Mongols? Why not Arabs? Why not the different Western empires? Why not Saddam Hussein, as I mentioned earlier, and why not Hitler? I leave this question here, and that's all from my side. Thank you.
Okay. Ma'am, would you like to take up POIs? Okay.
Absolutely, sir.
Opposition, would you like to raise a POI? Or we'll end the question?
Yes.
Yes, we would like to raise.
Yeah. The member of opposition can ask.
All right. So the respected Prime Minister spoke about how the United Kingdom brought in tea and cricket. Is that a proportionate comparison considering the fact what we lost? Can you really say it's a gain for us that we gained tea, or
Could
are
you
we in a better
repeat,
position
please?
because we have gained tea and cricket?
I request you to repeat it. Your voice was cracking.
Okay, I'll explain it. I'll repeat it briefly. The question that the opposition wants to ask the proposition is that is it a proportionate comparison comparing the bringing of tea and cricket with deprivation to that level of extent? Is it a proportionate comparison? Is the question.
Sir, I mentioned 3 points. First, agreed the cricket and the foreign languages one. Secondly, I mentioned that Britain got union politics in government in India. That is what I meant. Do you not think that making India united, making a union India is proportionate to what it lost? A political union India is very much proportionate to India loss, because if India wouldn't have been together, there was no point of concerning this motion right now. That's all from my side.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Points have been noted. Would the opponent team like to raise any point of order or point of personal privilege? Thank you. With that, we move on to the next speaker, the leader of the opposition party. The floor is all yours. You can start whenever you're ready.
Just 10 seconds.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm ready.
You can start.
Uh, so, so respected opposition, my fellow teammate, adjudicator, and judge, what we need to understand here is that the opposition, first of all, has failed to describe the proposition has failed to describe the motion, and as a burden, it now relies on the opposition, and I'm going to do the same for us. The motion for in the House stands today that the United Kingdom does not owe India any reparations for its colonial rule and what it did to India. Well, first of all, what are reparations? Reparations are the actions of making amends for the wrongs that one has done by providing payment or assistance to those who have been wronged. In this case, we Indians have been wronged, and the British were the ones doing the wrong. I would like to reiterate the fact that before the British came, India's economy had a share of 24.4% in the entire world. And when they left in 1950, when we gained our independence, we were down to 4.2%. If we would have had if we would have same growth trajectory, we could have reached mass amounts of development we can't even imagine today. The industrial output of India, which was 25% of the global share, came down to just 2% in 1900s. I'm just asking the uh, proposition again. Do you really think that this was right? Do you really think? No, I'm going to take the POI later. Thank you. The British came in our country and tried to destroy our culture, destroy our people, and destroy our economy. A very good example for this is the Indian textile industry, which was the most flourishing textile industry any country had ever seen, and the British just decimated it. The weavers in India lost their export markets, and the prices of raw cottons surged immensely after the American Civil War. And the British did not help Indians. In fact, they added the system of advantage and gomashtas to these Indian weavers, which helping the Indian weavers to not work and not have their goods regulated. Yes, ma'am, I'm going to take a POI.
So you were talking about how because of British, the textile industry was highly affected and was dismembered. Sir, if you consider the fact that was a statement of proto-industrialization, and British was the one who got industrialization, which actually increased, which actually made all these things better. The textile agreed had a good quality, but the bulkness and what a quality came in nowadays due to the shift from proto-industrialization to industrialization from Britishers is extravagant. How would you like to justify the statement?
Ma'am, what you have failed to understand is that the British Industrial Revolution, which changed the outlook of their history, was actually based on the deindustrialization revolution that they were driving in our own country. They deindustrialized India and industrialized themselves. They stopped our goods and helped their sons. Now, coming on to other points, uh, they first of all they destroyed our culture by pillaging our country and looting our country at every step. They stole our gold, our silver, our ancient texts and manuscripts, and they even altered the way of our education and history by teaching what they wanted and telling the people how they felt India was. Now, Indians feel insecure when they're talking about their culture because the British have taught them some things that they believe are just truly atrocious. Some things that were not even as profound have been exploited by the British in our education text. Now you talk about so much. Now you talked about many things that the British have given us. For example, the railways, the tea, and the English language. First of all, the railways, they were overcharged to Indians. They was built by the taxpayer money of Indians. They overcharged Indians as it costs twice the amount as much as in much more dangerous and much less populated Canada and Australia. And it costed the 9 times of the United States railway that the British built. You talk about tea. They failed in so many attempts to replicate the Chinese tea. And when they finally discovered it and started to grow it, they had destroyed vast amounts of forest areas. And the tea that was also produced was sent at an instant back to England. And the mere tea that was left, small amounts of tea, the Indians could not afford it at any cost. You talk about the English language, well, it was taught and used by the British for their own benefit, showing people that how English is the answer to intellectualism and intelligence, and that other vernacular languages or our local language is bad. Ma'am, that is not what we wanted to come. They deprive people of their culture. They deprive people of their rights. We could not. No, sir, I'm not going to accept the POI. The people could not have the rights as the English free men had, only because we were not as civilized and not as taught. Also, now going to talk about another thing that the British did in our country. We right now are facing so much problem with our forests, with our pollution levels, and this can be attributed to the British. I'll tell you why. Because of the Forest Act of 1865, in which the British controlled the forests and they drove out the people who were living in the forest. So, first of all, they deprived the people of their culture. Then they started to cut down all the trees and started doing and started building mono forest, the forest which only had one type of tree, which reduces the diversity and also the life of a forest. This Forest Act also gave them the right to do whatever they want, and that's why they started hunting leopards and tigers, as we know. And that's why we know that India's tiger and leopard population reduced to so low during the time of British, and we are struggling even now. But now India has re-emerged in the world and shown the world that we have made some rights after their wrongs. Now, also, the major thing that is the British responsible for, which I have not even come to yet, but I'm now going to speak about, is the creation of India and Pakistan. They divided the country into two states and eventually three, which was not, which was in their entire plan. A man was hired by the British to draw the map of India, who had never seen India, and he was even given only 2.5 months. And he drove just some mere lines on the paper. The entire Sindhi community was just deprived of a homeland. Ma'am and sir, I'm going to ask the proposition in the end. Are these is this right? Is what the British have done in our country right? Their deprivation of our economy, our culture, our people, is that right? Was killing of so many people in the Bengal famine, in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, in the wars that we fought for the British right? Don't these families deserve their men and women back? I'm going to ask you. And with that, I conclude my speech. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Points have been noted. Is there a point of order or a point of personal privilege that the opponent team would like to raise?
So I don't know if this comes under point of order, but I didn't mention the term railways in my entire speech. Just that.
Okay, so no,
The opposition used railways by answering statement,
I
but I
clearly
didn't
said,
use it
ma'am, you
as
talked
well.
about several things
Let
that
me
the
complete,
British.
sir.
Yeah.
Sorry, please don't interrupt. Just that the opposition used the term, saying that proposition used in a speech, but the proposition didn't use the term railways in my speech. That's it.
Can you just clarify that out?
no, I'm sorry. Since it's a point of order, you cannot clarify that out. But Judge, do you think we should be considering the same?
The proposition used railways as one example in their speech,
No, sir.
but with respect to your introduction, you did say that the British brought in railways into the country.
Sir, I said British brought in tea, cricket, and foreign language. That was my statement.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Fair enough. I'll take that into advisement. And the opposition, please do note that.
Sir, but my statement has been misinterpreted. I clearly did say that. Now I'm going to point. So I clearly did say the proposition talked about the things that the British brought in India, like the railways, tea, and cricket. I specifically said that, and English
Madam,
language. Sorry.
but yeah, I get it. But I think her point regarding the fact that she did not use it is fair enough, and I'll take it into advisement. Thank you.
Sir, I'm very sorry to interrupt. There is one thing I need to clarify. Just even if you don't take that into account, what my teammate I think has failed to communicate is that he's saying, as the proposition mentioned, that several institutions were set up and there was unity and all. So he was just giving an example of what was set up and how it was flawed. He didn't say that the proposition was mentioning it. He was just saying that this was one of the things that they set up. But even in this, there were so many. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Don't worry about it, participants. We'll anyway be taking all these, the whole debate under review regarding the point of orders again, just to be sure. But yeah, with that, we'll continue with the debate. The member of government, the floor is all yours. You can start whenever you're ready.
Yes, I'd like to begin.
Go ahead.
Yeah. To address the motion of the House that the United Kingdom does not owe reparations to the Republic of India for the historical injustices. The injustices against Indian society were indeed wrong. Yet, the typical narrative that casts the British as greedy savages who took away wealth from a utopian society is indeed wrong. Majority of Indians lived in rural India, barely above sustenance levels before, during, and after the British rule, as it were during the empires of the previous Muslim and Hindu rulers. Now, while talking in the context of opportunities, let us discuss the English language. With 800 languages and dialects, India is one of the most linguistically diverse places on the earth. Yet, with English, the English language has undoubtedly opened doors to innumerable opportunities for Indians, both domestically and abroad. And many Indian professionals attribute the success to the ease with which they speak the English language. And thus, this very language is a factor that India actively uses to its advantage while seeking foreign investment. After all, English is the language of the world, with over 59 countries having it as an official language. While talking about financial reparations, are, are they the only way of guilting rich nations into giving away more money? Countries that have successfully developed or are developing are doing so because of good economic policies and political discipline, not infusions of money. The member is in full support for reparations given for specific events and incidents, such as the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, in the form of an atonement. Yet, asking for reparations would be an endless process, as indirectly every single Indian would be affected by it. Taking into the context the Mongol conquest of Iran and Iraq, to which they blame for the destruction of the irrigation systems and damage that has far exceeded the European interference in such countries, such as the British, French, and the Americans, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Yet Iran and Iraq don't ask for such reparations. And why should India? Surely the world's largest democracy is able to hold its own in the global stage and has indeed done so. The typical examples of Japan, China, Germany developing, yet taking one of the many examples such as Japan, which has a stimulus of treaty ports which introduce Western style trade, shipbuilding, and technologies. It is also indeed said that India's share of the world declined dramatically between 1800 and 1947. But it must be noted that economic revolutions and massive shifts took place all throughout Europe and in the economies of the United States, Latin America, and many more states. Also, to answer to the typical statement that they ruined the textile industry, the delegate does agree to this. But there's one very controversial statement that is indeed said by Shashi Tharoor, that the Britain's own cloth manufacturers cut off the fingers of Bengali weavers. That is inherently wrong, as the bold 1772 text shows clearly that the British did not cut off the weavers' thumbs. And another source, Dadabhai Naroji's book, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, which never mentions any weavers having the fingers cut off. Finally, now onto the case. Now, sir, may I continue? Yeah, sorry, sir. Yeah. Finally, onto the case of the infamous Kohinoor diamond, as the opposition clearly said. Isn't it a symbol of the power of the early elites who had oppressed as much or maybe even more than the British in India? It is a jewel that every Indian politician would like to be returned. Yet, to whom would it be returned? The British acquired it from Lahore, which is now in Pakistan. And it should be noted that the diamond itself was never really the property of the Indian state, but rather the prize always fought for by rulers. Thus, virtually every possessor, from the Emperor Babur to Maharaj Ranjit Singh, has seized it from its previous owner. Thus, it can be said that the British created an infrastructure foundation in India and provided English education to create human resources to work for them. Yet, one must indeed ask, would India be better off without the British rule that gave rise to inspirational figures and create the India that exists today? I would also like to ask the opposition one question. Would you, as a privileged Indian, sitting before a computer, talking about this very topic, would you be in this position if were it not for the British? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would the opponent team like to raise a POI? You still have a
Yes, a point of order. Point of order.
Okay. Okay, then a POI cannot be raised. We'll have to end the statement.
No, I have a point of information and then the point of order can take place.
Okay.
Okay. So you talked about how how Mr. Shashi Tharoor said that fingers of weaver were cut off. Do you really think that he was talking in the literal sense and not in the fact that the supply and the work of the weaver was cut off? do you really think that he was talking in the literal sense? As in, because I have given much statements providing the fact that they were cut off their work, their supplies, and in fact, the system of advancement Gomashtas literally strangled them.
Ma'am, given Shashi Tharoor's great oratory skills, one must also note it's both a literal and figurative statement. It should also be noted that although the British didn't monopolize it, it also set the basic foundation for what India is today.
Okay, with
I
that,
have a point of information. Can I take?
yeah, you have 30 seconds left.
All right. So the point. So you mentioned Shashi Tharoor, sir, the member of the opposition. He has written vast amounts of literature on the reparation that the United Kingdom owes to us, and you are just conveniently disregarding that aspect of his argument and choosing one of the things he said about Indian weavers. So, by quoting Shashi Tharoor, you obviously hold him at a high ground as a person who holds authority in this matter. So, are you completely disregarding the arguments he has made about India getting reparation from the United Kingdom? He has given a speech in the parliament in several debates, and this is an issue that he has extensively spoken about. What are your comments on that?
Sir, I'm so sorry. Can you just summarize the question? Your voice started cracking in the middle. I'm so sorry.
So, by quoting Mr. Shashi Tharoor, you have played the precedent that in this debate, you hold him as a figure of authority whose argument holds some weight in the House. So, by mentioning him, his other argument should also have a strength point, considering the fact that he has published large amounts of literature saying that India does deserve a reparation from the United Kingdom. It is something that he rose to fame because of, and it is something that he has extensively talked about. So, are you conveniently ignoring the fact that the ratio that if he's talked about UK giving reparation 100 times, and if he said one more thing, that too even a figurative way. So, are you completely ignoring that fact? Are you selectively
Sir,
choosing to believe and what not to
yeah.
believe from a person
Okay,
of
okay. Okay, sir. Thank you so much for your question. It should also be noted that Shashi Tharoor did indeed say that we do not need any reparations. He rather introduced a policy of £1 sterling for the next 200 years. I do believe he said that India doesn't need the reparations. So if you can kind of fact check yourself in terms of that, I would greatly appreciate it.
point of
Yeah, right now points have been completed. Point of orders and point of personal privileges placed.
All right. So, in the argument, it was stated that Shashi Tharoor is against reparation. According to the article of Times of India, his official statement on national news, he said and he gave figures about how much Mr. Shashi Tharoor wants the reparation to be. He gave proper background. So, I think the member of the government is a little ill-informed about that fact because it is quite clear that he has asked for reparation for India.
So, but,
Okay,
I'm so sorry.
No,
Can I
I'm
respond?
really no, you cannot respond. There's a point of an order. Judge, would you like to consider the same?
Another point of order, please. Can we raise it?
Sir, please make it very, very concise. Please make it very
Okay,
concise.
one more point of order. The Kohinoor was nowhere mentioned in our argument. I think that was pre-curated by the proposition. So we would like to clear out how we did not raise any argument or constructive or even counter argument about the Kohinoor. That was just out of context.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. With respect to Shashi Tharoor's arguments, that is not the focus of today's debate. Please do not waste your time arguing about him. We'll discuss about him a bit later. Let us move on to the more constructive arguments of this debate rather than talking about what he said. Please bring in your arguments as constructives. Do not ask counter questions regarding what he said. That's not the focus of today's debate, firstly. Secondly, with respect to Kohinoor Diamond, I'll allow the speaker to just clarify with exactly 15 seconds whether Kohinoor Diamond was brought up or not. Mr. Member of Government, please.
Thank
Member
you,
of
sir.
Government, you have 15 seconds to rectify yourself.
Sorry?
I'm giving the member of the government 15 seconds to answer if Kohinoor Diamond was brought up or not. Please be very concise, sir.
So in terms of the Kohinoor Diamond, I do believe the leader of the opposition mentioned that the British stole numerous precious jewels away from India. Isn't the Kohinoor Diamond one of them?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It's very clear that they did not mention Kohinoor Diamond as such. So I'll take that point into advisement. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Judge. With that, we move on to the next speaker, the member of the opposition party. The floor is all yours. You can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, moderator. Good morning, respected adjudicator, moderator, and the proposition. As the leader of the opposition is stated before, the opposition strongly believes that United Kingdom needs to pay reparation to India, and we will try to convince you of the same today. The motion has been defined by the leader of the opposition. The first arguments of the Prime Minister, as I know it, were one, that the United Kingdom has set up institutions, has brought culture, and has led to development of the country. The second one is the question, a very important question, I would say, that why aren't the Mongols, Romans, and all the historic emperors and all the despotic powers, like Saddam Hussein, for example, she stated, why shouldn't they pay reparation, right? All right. So what we are saying is we are not in any way supporting any other government. We are not any other imperialistic power. But 2 points that need to be considered is that Britain is under the debate right now. Mongols did not design, or Saddam Hussein did not design a global economic system that remains in place today. Britain did. And this is precisely the core of our argument. And there is fundamental continuity between the international economic system and that was consolidated from 1600 to 1950 and the one that exists today. There are some obvious signs of this. Let me ask you, who controls the World Bank? Who controls the IMF? Who controls the WTO? The three key institutions that govern the rules of global economy. Voting power of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund is monopolized by a small handful of rich nations, the US, Britain, France, Germany, namely. So that argument in itself is flawed. Now, coming to the second argument, that what about the legacy, the institutions that were set up, right? Colonization is not a necessary vector for transfer of the knowledge and infrastructure. It is obscene to believe otherwise. One can build universities without colonizing other countries, indeed. It is done regularly today. But more importantly, the idea there are some kind of net good that came out of colonialism is deeply disturbing. Even if there was some good of empirical evidence for this, it is a chilling calculus, as if erecting universities somehow justifies the 200 years of violent disposition, as if the Victoria Memorial stacks up against 60 million corpses. Now, coming to the arguments today, I would like to take you back to imagery, using imagery, long lines of people walking in snow for days without food. The moment they stop, they will be beaten to death by guards. When they reach their destinations, they're separated from their families and are made to work in labor camps. There are piles of dead bodies everywhere. Everyone is just counting their days until they will be put into gas chambers. Doesn't this bring a profound fear, a ghastly horror in your minds? Doesn't it appeal to your emotions? In the above argument, I did not mention any race or any country, but I am sure that everyone in the house today is aware that I was talking of the Holocaust. That is because the above mentioned genocide has been very well documented. But what is extremely surprising to know is that the number of deaths in India due to the British rule were apparently 40 times more than that of the Holocaust. This is unheard of by Indians or by foreigners. Yes, the British rule was in a way a genocide. Now, to define genocide, according to the Convention, Article 2 of the UNGA, in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a nation, national, ethnical, racial, or religious group by killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring its physical destruction, imposing measures intended to prevent births within a group, and other such things. Now, how did this happen? In India, 15 to 29 million Indians died of starvation in the British-induced famines from 1857 to 1902. The most famous example was, of course, the Great Bengal Famine during the World War II, where 4 million people died because Winston Churchill deliberately, as a matter of written policy, proceeded to divert essential supplies from civilians in Bengal to sturdy tummies and Europeans as reserve stockpiles. He said that the starvation of anyway underfed Bengalis mattered much less than that of sturdy Greeks. This is Churchill's actual quote. And when the conscience-stricken British officials wrote to him pointing out that the people were dying because of this decision, he wrote in the margins of the file, "Why has not Mahatma Gandhi died yet?" Why is this not being documented in plays, operas, songs, poems, movies for the people to know? Such are the blinders provided by the white man. The second thing that needs to be highlighted and understood is that British rule heightened ethnic and religious conflicts and created division in geopolitical terms, where territory became intertwined with identities, which further led to factionalism and conflicts. This is an issue that even to this day heavily affects India and its politics. According to the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers Annual Survey 2016, 29.5% of the respondents believe that the biggest problem in India is that of religious conflicts. Now, this is not just the result of one survey. The results were reflected in the surveys by the Times of India and the Economic Times in the year 2017 and 2018, respectively. The third thing that needs to be highlighted is the economic impact that the British rule had on India. The argument that India was developed under the British rule is flawed because it was rather de-developed, and not just in terms of social welfare. British
The
policy.
point of information.
Yes, I'll be taking that.
Yeah. So now when you're talking about as per the UN Convention on Human Rights, I do believe that's what he said, if I'm not wrong. On the basis that you consider a mass
Sorry to
genocide.
interrupt. You're wrong.
Okay, fine.
I did not say that. That
Okay,
was not,
fine. So now you can. So now, if I'm not wrong, you would consider genocide to be ethnic cleansing in some form or the other, right? So now, in terms of that, would you consider America to be? So let me complete my question. You can answer. Yeah.
I'm really sorry.
So wouldn't you
I'm really sorry to interrupt, moderator. There's something that I need to clarify.
Go ahead.
So the reason that the definition was provided so that it doesn't lead to any other alternate, what do you call it, interpretations. So if that is just what I want to clarify. So if a question is about the clarification of what the definition is, that was already stated in the speech. This is only my clarification. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay.
Continue with
Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of that, wouldn't you consider the United States of America to be a byproduct of ethnic cleansing? Wouldn't you consider the fact that the natives of America shouldn't they be paid reparations by Spain due to Christopher Columbus's actions? And yet we consider America to be a world power, as said by you.
All right, thank you. Good question. That is completely irrelevant to the topic at hand, and that is something that I would not like to on, and I would like to continue rather. So the argument that India was developed under the British rule is flawed because it was rather de-developed, and not just in terms of social welfare. British policy was designed to destroy domestic industries by imposing an asymmetrical tariff, dismantling institutions that trained producers, and in some cases, by even maiming skilled artisans, all to create captive markets for British goods. Now, to conclude, I would also like to state that they might have brought the institutions, but that does not that completely ignores the fact that India already followed an arithmetic process, an earlier predefined syllabus, which was completely uprooted, for as stated by the leader of opposition, that was not for the benefit of Indians. That was for the benefit of the British to show that they hold some power. They brought in their education to show how inferior Indian education and culture is, not because they wanted to help India to grow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Points have been noted. Would the opponent team like to raise for a point of order or a point of personal privilege?
No.
No? Okay. With that, we end the first part of the debate. We'll be moving on to the rebuttal round. Just a few instructions before we go ahead with the rebuttal round. Note that the rebuttal round is for each speaker is 4 minutes each. Please note that the point of information would not be is not admissible during during the rebuttal rounds. You can only use a point of personal privilege or a point of order after the speaker is done presenting. Also note a fact that no new facts can be brought into light under the rebuttal round. All the facts that's put forward during the rebuttal round needs to be under the purview of the debate that's been commenced since now. Okay. With that, we move on to the first speaker, the leader of the opposition party. The floor is all yours. You can start your rebuttal whenever you're ready.
Yes, I would like to begin. So I will start by right jumping into the rebuttals of arguments made by the proposition team. The member of government clearly stated that how English is the language that is spoken by so many countries and is the official language of 51 countries, and we are grateful that the British have given it to us. Okay, sir. As far as it's concerned, I would like to tell you the fact that this, in fact, English language was brought into countries by the British Empire, and how they discouraged their own native languages, their own regional dialects, and imposed English on them for their own benefit, that they can communicate with the people and take all the money from them. All right. And now talking about the issue of Kohinoor, you said, and even if Kohinoor come back, who will be it handed over to, and why does the British? Well, Kohinoor was ours. It was produced on our land. Don't we deserve a part of what was ours? Not only the Kohinoor, you leave the Kohinoor out. The ancient manuscripts, the ancient texts, the other jewels, other artifacts, which are now lying in British museums and gain hundreds and thousands of viewers every day. The British museums earn money because of that. Why doesn't India deserve these artifacts, these texts, their culture, their heritage back? Please answer this question. Coming on to the points of economic and infrastructure. Well, India, as a matter of fact, was a factory and a cash cow for the British. In fact, I will even have the liberty to name it as a slaughterhouse, where the Indians were the workers and the Indians were being slaughtered, and the head of the factory was in fact the British people. How they scammed the people and robbed them out of all their wealth, robbed them out of their culture, robbed them out of their dignity, and left them with nothing because they were not English white men. How they were not even given the respect of a basic person, and how they felt, and how they were always belittled at each and every point of time. So I would like to ask you, as my members previously stated, that the numbers of that the British rule in India was in fact a genocide, a mass ethnic cleansing of the people who were not free English men. I would like to ask you now, coming on to the point of other, in fact, as the proposition very clearly said, that Saddam Hussein and why the Native Americans and etc. etc. So first of all, that topic is out of context. We're talking about the British paying reparations to India and not some other country. In fact, and even if they do, what Indians have suffered, I'm sure that they also might have suffered the all the things that India has suffered. But I would just like to tell you that India now has come up again and is asking and demanding at least some sort of reparations. As Shashi Tharoor stated, that it can be in any form, but India does deserve what it actually had. We cannot let British have anything and gain profit for that. The British ruled in India and pillaged our country. You talked about how in agricultural output and stuff. So let me tell you that actually the British destroyed our agriculture output by growing rice and only the indigo and the other cash crops that they wanted, and destroying our farms and farmers. And whenever the farmers asked for something, they were either killed or taken away from their land, and the British started owning the land. The British, in fact, even left India and destroyed it. The Kashmir problem, the division of our country, the entire partition was in fact Britain's problem. How they not considered the people's welfare? If you're at least ruling the people, then you at least should have the responsibility and at least some sympathy towards them, that okay, these are people, these are also living lives like us, we can't do that to them. But the British did not consider that at all, because we were a cash cow for them. We were just people who were just feeding money to them. Is that what it is? With that, has the time elapsed?
Yeah.
Okay. And with that, I would like to rest the opposition's case. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Points have been noted. Is there a point of order or a point of personal privilege that the opponent team would like to raise?
Point of order.
Yeah.
The opposition team stated that 51 countries could speak English, whereas I quote, 59 countries could speak English.
So I clearly stated that the 51 countries have English as their official language.
May I raise a point of order?
No, you cannot. Judge, I'm really sorry that
I think there has been a very clear misunderstanding. Like, I'll take that into advice. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, points have been noted. With that, we move on to the final speaker for the day, for the match. Prime Minister, the floor is all yours. You can start whenever you're ready.
Yeah. I'll start by rephrasing what I meant since beginning. British turned the proto-industrialized society of handlooms and textile industries into an industrial one, which led to high growth of economic rate. Secondly, let's talk about the environmental concerns which the opposition was stating. Let me clear that tea cultivation can increase the significance of organic C into the soil, which hence wasn't a cash crop, agreed, but the plantation was more than a cash crop. Now, if we see the fact, the soil and the whole soil and the stocks were increased just because of plantation of tea. Now, about the English language. Sir, how about looking down into the paper we are reading from? It is all English. Don't you feel that English is shaping India? Don't you feel English is rising India? Now, if we talk about the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, why don't you know that General Dyer was sent back? That was the step taken by them. Now, if we look at the point of Kohinoor, India doesn't have Kohinoor because India never asked for it. Now, lastly, I would like to conclude by saying that the opposition still stands firm on the fact that UK does not owe reparation to the Republic of India for historical injustice because British has cooperated with them in many aspects and led India, improved India, and got India to the state where India is right now. India being such an amazing country right now, India being at so high state, being a developing country, can't just ask for a reparation as opposition stated earlier that it is some monetary value. No, no, sir. Monetary value is not that India really wants as a reparation, whereas reparation could be in any terms as corporation or just by idealistic atonements. That's where I would like to conclude. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Points have been noted. Would the opponent team like to raise a point of order or a point
Yes, a point of order. So, it's the duty of the Prime Minister to explain the motion in the start, and that is when they have to define what a reparation is. And when they fail to do so, the definition that the opposition gives, that is the definition that the House needs to consider. So, by giving the definition that ma'am just gave right now, that reparation is not just an economic term, so that in itself is flawed, and it cannot be considered that way, I think.
Okay, Judge.
I understand that the Prime Minister did not raise the definition in the first place, but at any point in the debate, if they wish to bring in a definition which they think is right, I think it can be accepted. Thank you so much.
So just a clarification.
Go ahead.
So as the moderator stated that no new points or information can be brought in the rebuttal. So
Madam, it was not a new constructive argument, but it was merely a clarification of their stand.
all right, thank
It was
you.
not a new point.
Okay, with that, we come to the end of this debate. Thank you so much for participating, debaters. It was a really great event. I'm pretty sure the judge has a lot of feedback and comments to make regarding the same debate.
Guys, that was a really brilliant debate. I really enjoyed listening to all your arguments, but I'd like to raise 3 points before I start off with my comments. Primarily, it is the fact that the motion today is very clear. It is regarding reparations. Is it owed or not? That is primarily the motion today. But what I found in all your arguments was that you were again reiterating why the British rule was bad, why it was bad, why it was bad, why it was not good. But both the sides, not just the opposition, but even the proposition as well. I think it would have made more sense if you guys had argued regarding the reparations as such as the main focus of your debate. But I found that reparations was merely a side aspect of your debate, and you came to it at the very end. But it would have been good if you had raised something like I'll give the example of the member of the government. He stated regarding specific reparations, but see, at the outset, it seems like a contradiction because the Prime Minister stated that there will be no reparations, but the member of the government is saying there will be specific reparations. That is a different story as such. But as an example, if you guys had brought in something like that into your arguments, I'm talking about the opposition here. If a type of reparation had been brought in as an argument, it would have brought a lot more clarity into your case. And with respect to the opposition, I mean, proposition, you guys it was a pretty tough argument to make for you guys because owing to our standpoint in this whole issue, arguing on that side of the emotion, I'm sure was a bit difficult for you guys. But there have been a lot of see, and one more thing which I noticed was you guys took Shashi Tharoor too seriously. Mr. Shashi Tharoor is an Indian politician who spoke at the Oxford Union debate, and I'm sure he's not a man to be quoted in a debate so extensively. I don't think he would have expected this to happen. But see, in on that same note, if you guys had read BBC article by Mr. John McKenzie, it was a reply that he gave to Mr. Shashi Tharoor. So see, every person has an opinion, every statesman has an opinion regarding this matter, but you guys, as debaters, could have brought in your own individual arguments into this and not quoted him so extensive. Anyway, since his speech was so uh, impactful, I guess it makes sense for you guys to do it. But yes, I do think that Shashi Tharoor could have been brought up a bit lesser in your debates. And I heard a lot of classic victim arguments, your Kohinoor Diamond, your textile industry. All these things are very classic arguments that any Indian would give against the British rule. But the opposition could have brought in the aspect of reparation a bit more, and the proposition could have answered this a bit more in terms of how reparations is not the concept. Again, the proposition went on talking about how the British rule was good for the country. But yes, everyone knows that there are a few arguments which is for the British rule and there are arguments against the British rule. But today's motion is not this house believed that the British rule was bad for India. See, that would have been a good motion for you guys to argue on today. But today's was very clear, reparations. So it could have been more oriented towards that on both the sides. I'm not talking about any one side. Both the sides could have done that. It was a bit lacking in my opinion, but all your arguments were very, very genuine and very, I would say, emotional arguments. And I think the motion demands emotional arguments, and both of you had it. And it was a very good debate. I think it was good, and a lot of point of orders and point of information. It makes it all a really good experience, and I think it was very good. I really enjoyed witnessing you guys talking, and I'm sure the moderator enjoyed it too. And let's see, it's a very tough choice today, guys. A good job done. Best of luck to the team that wins today. Thank you so much.
So I have a clarification.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. So you're right about Shashi Tharoor. So the reason we didn't mention him in our speeches in the point of information, it wasn't about Shashi Tharoor. It was that if you are mentioning a person who has made a statement about something, then his other statements on the same topic should also hold valid, right? So my
I
question.
understand. I understand, sir. I get your point. You raised it in a very genuine manner, and I guess you answered. You raised it based on what the proposition spoke, right? I get that. Don't worry. I'm not using this against you guys. It was a general statement I made regarding both the teams using Mr. Shashi Tharoor as a source for your arguments. That's about it. Don't worry, sir. Don't worry.
But it also should be noted that you're extensively quoting his very lines in your speech. Just saying.
I'll take that as note, sir. I'll take.
So you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, guys. With that, we come to the conclusion of the debate. For me, it was very, very interesting to see school students take up such a controversial topic and bring about such facts into light, which really turned out to be a really heated debate, to say, really well structured argument to put in both fronts. So thank you so much for participating. I'm pretty sure you guys had a great experience taking part in our parliamentary debate. I hope you did. But thank you so much for participating either way. We'll keep you informed regarding the results. We'll let you know as soon as possible. But until then, stay safe, take care. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you,
Had a
judge.
great
Thank
Thank you,
debate.
everyone. Yeah.
Thank you,
all.
opposition team. You
All
guys
the
did
best,
really well.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, opposition.
Thank you, Judge.
Moderator, and thank you, judge. Have a good day, everyone.
Okay. Thank you so much, participants. Just make sure that until and unless your internet connectivity is pretty low, don't go off video. It's a semifinals round. So it's better if you have the video on. Thank you. Okay, guys, I'm just gonna give you 5 seconds to see if you have any other further questions regarding the debate. But after the 5-second mark, we can get started on with the debate. The time starts now. Okay, with that, I think it's all clear. We'll get started on with the debate. Prime Minister, as stated, the floor is all yours. You can start with statements whenever you're ready.
Hate is a burden I do not wish to bear, so I choose love. As the Prime Minister, I will now state the structure that me and my teammate will be following. I will set across definitions of terms that I will be using in my debate. I'll be providing context, clearing any ambiguity, and covering the methodology that the Antifa uses. My teammate will be providing supporting arguments for the same, as well as constructive solutions as is the purpose of any debate. So what is anti-fascism? Anti-fascism is opposing fascism, which is a political system based on a very powerful leader, state control, with no political opposition being allowed. But the United States of America is a federal constitutional republic where the president, the Congress, and the judiciary maintain national government powers, and the federal government shares sovereignty with the states. So fascism is just being used as another generalized insult term. And the United States of America and Donald Trump do not qualify for this term fascism. Let's talk about Hitler. In the 1930s, he had one of the most powerful, is that a point of information?
No, it's just one. You can go ahead.
Sorry. So he had one of the most powerful historical backings, the most powerful political backings. And he had this because of the way he spoke and the things that he got done. Whether people were intimidated by him or were inspired by him or wanted to stand in solidarity with him, they went ahead and they got back in line. And they did this out of fear and out of respect. Anyone who stood out of line was purged. There was a Jewish boycott of stores in the 1933, and this no form of resistance moved past the 1937 year mark. And this is because that is how a fascist state works. When you bring contrast to the United States of America, where there is no civil unity, and where there are supporters of Trump, and there are people who are resistant to these Trump supporters and to Trump's ideologies, they have universities and forums where they come forward and they speak. You have students, teachers, parents, veterans coming forward, voicing their opinions, knowing that these opinions are heard, because that is how a non-fascist state works. In Hitler's time, this was not a point of information.
You can ask participant.
Mr. Prime Minister, could you please tell me the ratio of the minority people currently holding power in institutions like Parliament in the United States of America?
I do not have knowledge to that answer, so I cannot answer it. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
All right. So Germany had something called We, where they defined who would be a minority and who would not be a minority. And based on this, they issued hundreds of decrees, hundreds of acts, and hundreds of regulations to target these minorities who they stated as minorities from birth. Whereas in the US, where there is racism, people have voices. People have the Black Lives Matter movement. And this was brought about, and this was re-emerged due to the George Floyd killing, and brought about because another person was shot 7 times in the back. And it is because people have this chance to voice their opinions that I go ahead and state that America is not an anti-fascist, is not a fascist state. And some people say that because of the high incarceration state in the United States of America, that America is fascist. But I ask you this, out of the Democrats in there, out of the media people in there, out of the journalists in there, they are not there for their ideologies or the things that they said. They are there because they're convicted by courts of law for crimes that they broke, for crimes that they committed. Now let's talk about the Antifa. It is a highly decentralized, anti-authoritative, anti-capitalist, anti-fascist, and anti-state organization consisting of anarchists, communists, and socialists. And their point of information.
Since you're talking about laws in detail, considering even in the United States, the Supreme Court bench has a majority of conservatives, how do you make sure that there is equality in terms of providing decisions in favor of the oppressed?
So now that comes down to the court of law, not necessarily the court of justice. And that does not bring about anything to do with fascism. That can talk about inequality, but not fascism, where fascism is power to one and supreme power to that one. Does that answer your POI? All right. So now the Antifa are self-proclaimed revolutionaries, and they are termed as far-left militants for the sake of their methodologies employed. Talk about the methodologies. They start with digital activism and posters, and then they move to online harassment, violence, using clubs, Molotov cocktails, non-platforming, and property damage. They also do something wherein they block people from coming forward and stating their opinions. They have literally sent emails to individuals stating that, you know, we have more power than the police in this sector and that we can block the police from actually saving you. So if you care for your life, do not come forward and speak. And individuals fearing for their life, do not come forward and speak. And this is something that a fascist individual do. Instead, someone in the name of Antifa is doing it. This is what I call spreading terror. So what is terrorism? In the United States of America, terrorism is defined as activities that involve acts dangerous to human life, that are a violation of criminal laws of the United States or any states intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policy of a government by intimidation or affecting the conduct of government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Guess who fits the bill? The Antifa. Now, non-leftists see the left as lawless, violent individuals. And that is an opinion. But the Antifa are the ones who come forth and confirm these opinions. Whether an individual is non-left or leftist, that doesn't matter, because the Antifa will come, sorry, POI.
Yeah. The FBI Director Christopher Wray on 17th September 2020 stated in a press conference that the Antifa is an ideology, not an organization. When the FBI in and of itself is saying it's not a terrorist organization, please, how can you defend the claim of Trump that it is still a terrorist organization? Justify.
So I am not claiming that the Antifa is a terrorist organization. I say that their activities line up with the definition of terrorism. They are not an organization. I very clearly stated that they are a highly decentralized individual consisting of different parties. I hope that answers your POI. Now, back to non-leftists seeing the left as lawless violence. It is because the Antifa that they confirm this nature of these individuals. So in studies conducted in Princeton University and the University of Denver, there have been studies that prove that non-violent protests and non-violent solutions always move forward and always have a higher succession rate. So in order to talk about what fascism can achieve at the end of the day, when there is no fascism, how does anti-fascism come into play? Isn't there more important things that we as a country need to focus on? Which is why I stand by my motion, and I'd like to say that I strongly regret the fact that anti-fascism has risen so fastly in the United States with such a wrong objective. And with that, I'd like to conclude my speech. Thank you so much. Extremely proud to propose.
Okay, thank you so much, participant. Points have been noted. Is there a point of order or a point of personal privilege that the opponent team would like to raise? Fine, thank you. With that, we move on to the next speaker. The leader of the opposition party, the floor is all yours. You can start whenever you're ready.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Great. I'll just start my timer and then I'll begin. Give me 5 seconds. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, the world that we currently envisage and the world that we're currently living in is not the world that the Prime Minister would want you to believe. It's the world that still has Jim Crow laws in place. It's the world that still has institutions of power who have individuals who have absolutely no connect with the real life problems that individuals of minority classes that face on a daily basis in the United States of America. When we have people like Mr. Donald Trump and his fellow advisors in positions of power who have absolutely no incentive mechanism to even listen to the liberal side, to even probably listen to the left-wing, let's say, strata of the political spectrum, at that particular point in time, we think the definition of fascism that the PM wants you to believe is categorically incorrect. The definition of fascism in current day context then transforms into not just 100% accumulation of power, but simply the attempt at trying to silence the other side, the attempt to try and distort the other side from accessing democratic features that every single person has the authoritative right to. Before I move on to constructives from side opposition, 2 pieces of extraneous rebuttals. Firstly, PM claims that non-violent means will result in better outcome. We don't know how that is going to happen. All he says is that, look, a study tells us that it's going to happen. For the past 70 odd years, there is happening let's say, a non-violent movement with respect to people from the left joining different political parties and trying to form a group of sorts that can have a political impact that clearly hasn't worked. AOC, Mr. Speaker, has tried to implement 4 new policies with respect to incarceration rates for the past 6 years and has consistently failed to do so simply because the conservatives aren't going to give in to her vote. That is the context that is going to happen. Non-violent means or means other than Antifa are never going to succeed in their side. Second point of rebuttal is that they say that, look, the minorities in power are not really, there's not really any harm being done to them currently. Therefore, Trump and the institution can't really be categorized as a fascist state. That's what they say. Firstly, the mere attempt at trying to silence different voters by telling them not to show up to polling booths, something which their own very president, Mr. Donald Trump, said on his Twitter page by saying that people who don't want to vote for me simply shouldn't be allowed to come out to vote. I think that qualifies the bare minimum benchmark of being fascist. Arguments from side opposition. 3 things I'm going to talk to you about in my speech. Firstly, the characterization of Antifa, why it's extremely important and exclusive and very different from any other leftist movement and is almost damn near guaranteed to succeed. Secondarily, why the leftist spectrum of political theory in the United States of America deserves a shot at a self-defense mechanism through violent means. And thirdly, why on a statistical basis of method, we think the probability of success is more on opposition side of the house. Firstly, with respect to characterization of Antifa, we think currently in the US context, there are 3 main left liberal movements that exist. One is the Occupy movement, second is the BLM, and then we have the Antifa movement. In 2007, Mr. Speaker, we didn't have Occupy Wall Street, we didn't have BLM. The reason why we have such large social movements is because the Antifa movement could donate the large amount of social capital that they had mobilized from the past and redistributed with respect to forming different movements. Therefore, in order to collectivize individuals, not taken, sir, I'm going to take it in 5 minutes. Therefore, in order to collectivize individuals, Antifa is incredibly important to have in the very first place, and it's incredibly important for it to rise, simply because it's a secretive organization. Nobody knows who's going to lead this particular movement. Therefore, the targeting of this particular movement by Trump and his fellow advisors is going to be very less as compared to BLM or less as compared to Occupy Wall Street movement. At that particular point in time, the unique structure that the Antifa provides a spring mechanism for different movements to come forward, like BLM, like Occupy Wall Street, something which is uniquely absent on government. They have to defend in their next speech. Secondarily, on the argument of self-defense mechanism, the Jim Crow laws that the United States government currently exercises is in the form of 4 things. Firstly, they tax the Black community without giving them adequate representation. This comes directly from my point of information that they never answered to you. The ratio, Mr. Speaker, of Black individuals and minorities in parliamentary positions is extremely pathetic and at an all-time low in US for the past 25 years. The reason for that is because many Black individuals don't want to come out to vote simply because they don't feel safe to do so. The reason for that is because they feel scared of being shot down in the streets, something which is happening as of today. They feel that they're going to be the next person who's going to become the next John Floyd out in the streets. Therefore, the government in power in US is putting a burden on Black individuals to not exercise their democratic right. We think that in and of itself, on a moral principled argument basis, qualifies for a self-defense mechanism. Secondly, they're imposing a system of ghettoization and also violent prison reforms. At that particular point in time, before I move on for this argument, any POIs? Go ahead.
All right. So the speaker stated that the Black community doesn't come forward to vote because they're scared to get shot. That completely doesn't make sense. Whereas Black people do come in, and majority, and then a lot of Black voters do support Trump. So
right. To counter your particular argument and your POI, in West Virginia, which has typically been a Black voter base for people like Joe Biden, it had a 70% less voter turnout in the previous state election, in the previous democratic elections. Your theory will never stand. Moreover, there has been an attempt to stop people from coming to vote in the first place. The fear in and of itself qualifies for self-defense. Moving on to ghettoization and prison reforms, absence of prison reforms. It's the 6 minutes. At that particular point in time, the reason why we need self-defense mechanisms in the first place is because Black communities currently live in small ghettos, which have been forced through laws like zoning laws, things like activating different areas between different rural and urban segregation. These particular laws still exist, Mr. Speaker, in the United States of America, something which government will never talk to you about because it is conveniently antithetical to the very case that they want to begin with in the first place. At a particular point in time, when Black people are systematically put out of halls of power, have not been given access to good quality education, have not been taught the basic values of civics, etc., etc., we think on two moral principles of self-defense and actually improving their own lives and quality of life that they lead. This movement is incredibly important, unique, and invaluable. We absolutely support the rise. Extremely proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you so much. Points have been noted. Would the opponent team like to raise a point of order or a point of personal privilege? Okay, thank you. With that, we move on to the next speaker.
I have a point of order.
Go ahead.
The first section of the constructive speech was utilized as a rebuttal. And my second point of order is that I was misquoted with regards to what I said about non-violence. I'm not so sure what exactly I said and what he said, but if the recording could be checked later on, I was misquoted.
Okay, no, you cannot answer that.
I can't respond because in the previous rounds we could respond.
No, in a point of order, you cannot respond. It only lies on the statement of the judge regarding the same when it comes to a point of order.
Fine, works for me.
Yeah, Judge?
Yeah, with respect to your first point regarding rebuttals in the constructives, that is not a valid point of order because he did not make just rebuttals. It was just an extraneous rebuttal that he made before his constructive speech. So that is valid. I'm sorry, I cannot allow that. But with respect to your issue with respect to misquoting, I'd give the opposition speaker exactly 15 seconds. Please do not take more than that to clarify what he stated.
I believe my statement was that the PM stated that a Florida some educational institute study said that non-violent means of protest, etc., will lead better results. That is the thing that I was rebutting to in my second rebuttal.
Thank you. So what do you say regarding that?
So I stated that the answer would be covered in the in the beginning of my speech. I stated that the second speaker would cover proof of whatever I had said, and I also did not quote the University of Florida. I quoted the University of Denver and the University of Princeton.
Right. Okay. Your points will be taken into advisement, and I hope your second speaker would give a valid argument regarding the same.
Okay.
I hope it satisfies you, Mr. Opposition Speaker.
Okay. Thank you so much. With that, we move on to the next speaker. The member of government, the floor is all yours. You can start to present whenever you're ready.
Scott Crow, who was a former Antifa organizer, said that the idea of Antifa is that we go where they go. That is, the right wingers go. The hate speech they spread is not free speech. That if they are endangering people and what you say and actions are behind them, then you do not have the right to do that. And so we go to conflict to shut them down where they are, because we do not believe that Nazis or fascists have any stripe that any stripe should have a mouthpiece. Wow, bravo, brilliant. But if this is what I go and say to any of the 1,000 families who lost family members, friends, their assets, or their livelihoods, they would shame me, and rightfully so, because that is what Antifa has brought upon them. Let me put this in layman's terms. Fascism is bad and evil. All right, let's park that on one side. Instigating and or taking part in violence and harming the innocent is also bad and evil. Instigating and or taking part in violence and harming the innocent for any reason is bad and evil. Instigating and or taking part in violence and harming the innocent, going against so-called fascism, is also bad and evil. Therefore, the Antifa movement right now is bad and evil. Let me state where Antifa fails. So Antifa isn't exactly one particular group or organization, right? It doesn't have fixed rules. So anybody who wants to call themselves Antifa declares themselves Antifa and then accuses anybody they want to be white supremacist or Nazi, and they can take charge against them. Now, this charge, what they take is usually in the form of violence. Antifa chooses to be ignorant. Antifa is ignorant to the safety measures of the public. Antifa is ignorant to public properties. And almost every time they take violent measures. Yeah, I see a point of information.
by a study of Center for Strategic and International Studies, they claimed that out of the 450 people killed in 2019, 329 of them were by right-wing neo-Nazis and 0 were by Antifa. Given all major institutions in US claim that there have been 0 lives lost by the hands of Antifa, how can you still say that they're a violent organization that only kill people?
I never said kill people. I said destroy public property and lose livelihoods. Right. So does that answer your question? All right. Okay, going forward, Antifa chooses to be ignorant to public safety and public properties. And they are supposedly fighting something against fascism, and this fascism does not exist in the United States. The Antifa receives funding from questionable sources. As Steve Turn, the head of Refuse Racism from Atlanta, accepted that they accepted funding resources from George Soros. The Antifa movement in general takes the advantages of democratic ideals such as free speech, ironically, to promote their undemocratic messages. Violent protests led to conservative backlash, while non-violent demonstrations helped liberals. This has been proven and has been stated by the Prime Minister. Also, Antifa risks feeding another conservative backlash, which will actually bring the public peace into threat. Also, Antifa has no tolerance for ideologies which aren't similar to theirs. I would like to say which aren't same to theirs. They do not allow people to have any other ideologies, and when people do have any other ideologies, they strike them down, usually using violent forces. The Anti-Defamation League that notes that a lot of Antifa activities occurs online, usually starts by harassing their so-called white supremacists or Nazis and ends up doxing them. The issue over here, okay, just a POI.
Do you think the neo-Nazis that are essentially anti-Semitic in US and claim that all Jews should be eradicated in 2020 have a valid point of opinion in current day political discourse?
Obviously not. The point is that the Antifa members fail to provide proof that whoever they are attacking is white supremacists or neo-Nazis. That's the issue we have. Does that answer your question?
You can continue.
Okay, so I would like to say that there are 2 types of faces. One are obviously faces. The second are anti-faces. It is literally bananas that people right now are debating if it's debating against or for the fact that is it all right to attack a reporter or a journalist just because they have dissimilar ideologies. I would like to give up a comprehensive strategy which is against Antifa. So first one is to stop giving to their demands. When a behavior is rewarded, and when I say rewarded, not punished, then people who are engaged in it would go forward for it, and people who do not engage in it right now will be incentivized to go for it. So I would like to say that we have to stop giving into their demands. Second, we have to fight fire with fire. When a behavior is punished, the people who are in the particular behavior will stop doing so, and other people will not be attracted to take up that behavior. So we have to punish the violent Antifa promoters dutifully. Third, we have to stop discouraging defensive violence, because defensive violence is what helps the public from getting damaged from the Antifa promoters. Then I would say we have to start calling Antifa people what they actually are. They are not protesters. They are, they are not protesters. They are rioters and they are terrorists. The establishment of mainstream media usually uses the terms quoted as protesters, but they are not. As Confucius said, the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper names. We have to declare that current organizations which takes part in violent Antifa movements as domestic terrorist organization. The simplest definition of terrorism that covers all instances of it is that it is the use of violence, threat, fear, and intimidation against innocent people for purpose of achieving political or social goals. And guess who does that? Antifa. We have to ban black bloc tactics. So which is already illegal in many places. Antifa people usually cover their faces with black masks, which avoids them from being identified. So this just shows cowardness and shows that they don't have a proper strategy. Whereas if we ban this, we can actually identify the people who, the violent Antifa people and the people who are actually truly standing for Antifa. Third, we have to increase the fine for riots. We have to increase the punishment for riots. After that, we have to charge anyone who promotes Antifa in a violent way, noting that Antifa sentiments are good, but Antifa in a violent way, no. We have to add police protection gun-free zones. One thing which is noticed that Antifa people and the violent Antifa people usually take up their riots in gun-free zones. We have to bring police protection in gun-free zones. A constructive suggestion is what I would like to provide at the end of my speech, is that we have to attempt to neutrally understand the concepts of reality and of situation at hand, including Antifa. If there still exists a need to protest, please do so, but with the protection and with the permission of the police, and not taking violence as a mean of showing your views. So throughout my speech and my and the PM speech, we find the criteria of this particular debate is to define the premise, providing context and cleaning ambiguity, providing arguments backed up with source-based facts, and fourth, providing constructive solutions. And we wholeheartedly feel that we have fulfilled them. With that being said, I'm extremely proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Points have been noted. Would the opponent team like to raise any point of order or a point of personal privilege?
Yeah, I have a clarification. If you can tell us whether this constitutes as a point of order or no. If one speech talks about something, but the other speech talks about something exactly the opposite, can that be considered a point of order?
In the case where a statement has been misinterpreted, you can call for a point of order. Say you stated it first, you made a statement regarding same first, but they've misquoted it in a different meaning, then you can raise a point of order. I think this is regarding the statement that you made, but they've interpreted it in a different way.
All right, we'll just pass. We'll move on to the constructors.
Okay. With that, okay, thank you so much, President. That we'll move on to the next speaker. The leader of the, member of the opposition party, ready to present whenever you
All
want.
right. I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, we need to understand a couple of concessions that they've given us right at the very outset, right? Firstly, the Prime Minister explicitly answered the POI by saying that I do not call these people terrorists, just that they fit the bill under terrorism. But specifically, the TPM comes up and says that these people are terrorists and rioters. We think that is an inherent contradiction that you need to take into consideration. Secondly, also when we ask a POI with regards to neo-Nazis and their policies of eliminating Jews as a valid opinion, right? They go ahead and concede that this is not a valid opinion, but therefore that is conceding to the principle literally that the Antifa stands for. So we are not exactly sure what they want to go ahead and achieve on their side of the house. But on a comparative, we tell you exactly why the motion is more relevant on our side of the house, right? Because you can't go ahead and give us constructive, let's say, mechanisms to make the movement better. You have to necessarily regret the movement in and of itself, not how to better the movement by, let's say, increasing the amount of fines that you have to pay in case you go ahead and commit violence. Bro, if that is the case, you can have that on our side of the house as well. But we are over here supporting the movement in and of itself. Apart from that, our extraneous rebuttals also include a very important point that they go ahead and bring up in the government speech, right? That you can't decide who actually is a white supremacist. You can't bring about such proof. And therefore, these people are indiscriminately going ahead and committing violence. Panel, neither side can say that any violence that has ever happened under the Antifa has either been justified or it has been unjustified. That's a ridiculous accusation to place on the movement. But we can tell you a propensity as to why this is justified violence, right? We tell you because at a point of time, you use unjustified mechanisms to dole out violence on individuals. You are only going ahead and disreputing your own movement, harming your movement in and of itself. We don't think that is an incentive that these people inherently have, right? They want more propagation of their movement. They won't go ahead and do unjustified violence at a point of time. But largely, they go ahead and say that these are people who do not necessarily want any other ideology in the world. They just want their ideology to prevail. We think that isn't necessarily true, but it is perceived that way because these people have never been given a voice in and of itself. Considering all of that, these people want to impose or at least be able to create an avenue of discourse. Yes, I'll take your POI.
Okay, so as me and my Prime Minister already stated that we are refuting the current movement of Antifa. We are not against the Antifa sentiments. Antifa, we are all against fascism. That's a very well-known fact. We are against the fact that what Antifa is doing right now, which is rioting and destroying public property. That is our issue.
All right, very, very rightly pointed out by you as well, right? We are absolutely cognizant of the fact that there might be mild violence within the Antifa movement, and that is why Vishnu's whole speech becomes relevant, right? As to why he thinks that this is justified violence in and of themselves. Now, the option on a comparative is very similar on both sides panel. On side government, there will be active oppression of these people. These people's voices will be suppressed. they either have two options: either go ahead and fight for your rights, or go ahead and capitulate and give in to your own fate that has been decided by your oppressor, right? We tell you that on our side of the house, we will go ahead and fight for our rights, and even if it talks about mild violence, as long as it is able to bring about a certain amount of change, we think that is something that we are going to defend on our side of the house. But why is it important in the current status quo? Because fascism always inherently rises with the dominance of right-wing parties. Case in point, United States of America. And how does fascism thrive? On the suppression of the voices of the minorities. I will take your POI in some time. But more importantly, when your voice is going to be suppressed at all points of time by the institutions who inherently have more resources and have all law enforcement technologies and law enforcement agencies under their control, it becomes very imperative for you to go ahead and find an avenue for your voice to prevail within the status quo, wherein you can have engagement and discourse. We think that is where you go ahead, and you had already tried non-violent methods, and therefore when this doesn't actively end up giving you the recourse that you're looking for, it becomes a mildly violent movement, but specifically an active movement going ahead and vouching for their rights, right? We think at a point of time, you need to go ahead and sensitize either the extremists or the centrists towards your cause. It can only happen when you're able to gain traction for your movement, gain popularity for your movement. And even if this mild violence and public property, as characterized by us, is going to be only for a show to the public that we are able to do all of this, we think the discourse that comes out of it is much more exponentially valuable than, let's say, the cost of a building or a car that is being burned down, right? We think the discourse that is coming out of it is inherently valuable to these individuals because it is a question of their subsistence in this world. Yes, I'll take your POI.
Okay, first POI, where does the speaker draw the line between violence and mild violence? And also, should the action only be taken when Antifa people actually end up killing someone? Can we not take measures before that? Second, okay. Second, as my PM stated, that non-violent measures actually bring success. This has been proved by Princeton University reports. And also, I would like to quote that Mahatma Gandhi, who got freedom for our country, did through non-violence.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of hypothetical scenario involved over there, right? Firstly, when they go ahead and claim that Mahatma Gandhi is the only reason that we've got freedom. Firstly, we think that is absolutely ridiculous. We think the revolt of 1857, even though it was inherently violent in nature, was a specific unification point and a point wherein the whole country got together, right? And therefore, the value of this movement, that is the Antifa movement, being a sporadic movement spread across the United States, is very, very important. And therefore, we can't let this movement capitulate, because once you go ahead and do so, you are leaving the value of the central point that you had within the community in and of itself. But more importantly, you can't just impose a hypothetical scenario, right? That what happens if tomorrow they go ahead and kill people? We think that is, of course, something that we don't justify on our side of the house, and we've already proven to you through Vishnu's facts that that is something that doesn't necessarily happen. But why we tell you this violence is justified? Firstly, because there is no other mechanism for these people to go ahead and get any redressal, considering Republican majority is there in the parliament, but also in the Supreme Court bench, there is a conservative majority. We are not really sure as to why these people anyway have any sort of say in the status quo. But apart from that, it is a literal principle of democracy, right? That you can go ahead and protest for your rights, considering that the only then contention from side government becomes that it is necessarily about the violence. We tell you why this violence is justified, because now you've got a movement which can actually get people to sympathize with your cause, to have a general discourse with your cause, which you otherwise don't have through the history. If side government had to defend that, they had to go ahead and talk about how there is an importance and how there is more growth about the Black community also coming about within the United States of America, right? We tell you, therefore, radicalism becomes a lot more important, because the left-wing ideologies are largely counterintuitive in nature, because the right-wing ideologies, what do they work on? They go ahead and work on and they go ahead and tap into your fears, nationalistic principles. We think these are intuitively easier to buy on side government, and therefore we think it becomes a lot more easier for them to play on these nationalistic tendencies as opposed to on opposition when you're fighting for your left-wing ideologies. Considering they are so hard to buy, it is important for you to go ahead and use radical measures. Very proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you so much, participant. Points have been noted. Would the opponent team like to raise a point of order or a point of personal privilege?
Yeah, I have a point of order. The speaker continuously says protest in a mild violence way. That pretty much goes against the definition of protest. It's a riot when it happens. And that's why precautionary measures are taken. And second, the speaker always mentioned that the Antifa and the BLM movements, the BLM movement has actually caused so much damage to the Black community, and Black businesses have been pushed back in years of growth. So what does the speaker have to tell about that?
Okay, participant, I'm really sorry, but a POO can only be a statement which you're trying to claim to be wrong. You cannot ask a question. So can you please
Noted.
reframe both the
Apologies.
statements? Yeah.
Okay, so the speaker mentioned about Antifa and the BLM movements and how it actually helped the Black community. But in fact, BLM movements and protests have pushed back Black businesses in years of growth.
Okay.
I think I'd like to intervene here. So, with respect to your second point, that is not a factual error as such, because those are facts that can be proven on multiple grounds. So, I don't think I can accept that point of order as well. But with respect to your first question regarding how when a protest has violence, it becomes a riot. I think I'll take that into advisement when I'm looking into things. But your second point, I don't think that that's a valid view.
Thank you, sir. Duly noted.
Thank you so much, participants. Thank you so much, Judge. With that, we come to the first half. We end the first half of the debate. Moving on to the rebuttal rounds, there's a few rules and instructions to be stated before we move on to the next part of the debate. Please note that each participant has 4 minutes each to make the rebuttal statements. Please note that a point of information cannot be raised during a rebuttal round. Only a point of order and a point of personal privilege can be raised regarding the same. Also, one last thing, make sure that your points, your facts that you're putting across, there are no new facts that have been brought to light. All the existing facts that are inside the purview of the debate are the only facts that can be brought up during a rebuttal round. With that, I think it's pretty clear. I'll only be ringing a bell at the 4-minute mark to know that your time is up. Apart from that, no bells would be rung. So until then, with that, we'll move on to the first speaker for the rebuttal round, leader of the option party. You can start your rebuttal. The floor is all yours.
I'm audible? Great. I'll start in 5 seconds. There's some construction going on beside where I'm living. So if there is, just don't mind that.
We can't hear any of it, so don't worry about that.
Okay, great. I thought you can't hear me.
No, we can hear you, not the construction part.
Great. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, through the course of the next 4 minutes, I'm going to tell you why largely government case has been mitigated completely by the arguments that we've had and also the statistical facts that we've presented in the debate so far. But also secondly, through the second part of my speech, I'm going to explain to you why government has not been able to respond to any of the material that comes out from my speech or in Deepansh's speech, and all of those points stand and why we should take this debate. Firstly, on the contentions that we have with government bench, it's mainly 3. Firstly, they state that, look, we don't want violent forms of protest as a viable method or a viable mechanism to protest something in the current political discourse to begin with. The refutation from side opposition comes from the fact that we've claimed to you already in my speech why self-defense is a justifiable reason for you to slap someone at a neo-Nazi rally. The only point of contention that the opposition speaker, that the government presented in their second speech is that, look, you can't really distinguish whether someone is a neo-Nazi or not. We think on a simple, very comparative level, if somebody is participating in a neo-Nazi rally and is getting slapped, there is a higher probability that that person actually is anti-Semitic in nature. We have largely mitigate that also. But secondly, their only problem then becomes in terms of conceding to the R2 opposition case in the very second speech, when they state literally measures which could improve the Antifa movement. Mr. Speaker, the motion reads, this House regrets the Antifa movement, and not this House would actively reform and improve the Antifa movement. If I go by the speech of their DPM, it largely means in a different wording that, look, we support the Antifa movement, we just want to change a couple of things. That can also happen on opposition. We see a perspective of that happening on our case also. Then the government case becomes that, look, we don't want to have leftist protests at all in the nation to begin with. And that is not a statement that they make, so don't raise a POO. That is largely the inference that their case draws to you, right? At that particular point in time, why do we necessarily win this debate? It's because of 3 reasons. Firstly, we've proved to you why the violence that has been currently caused over all the political spectrum in US is largely populated towards the right-wing spectrum. There are multiple studies that have happened in the United States. Even the FBI director has told you in a 17 September press conference that the Antifa is an ideological movement and not an organization which induces violence amongst individuals. The FBI director, Mr. Speaker. We have various government-backed institutions like the Center for Strategic and International Studies claiming that 329 out of a possible 450 lives have been lost due to neo-Nazi activism and neo-Nazi violence and 0 by Antifa. So the only problem that government now has in our case is probably an Antifa member slapping a Nazi individual at a neo-Nazi rally. We think that's a highly acceptable outcome. We have no problem with slapping and kicking. That is justified due to 3 things. Firstly, I've proved to you why ghettoization happens in United States today. How Black community especially is being kept out of bastions of power through the means of housing mechanisms, through the means of not giving them access to good quality education as compared to the white privileged individuals, through the means of scaring them into not coming out to vote, therefore compromising on their very democratic right in the first place. All 3 of these things, Mr. Speaker, deserve a slap in the very first place. We have justified why even any amount of violence which has happened up till this date is completely okay on the Antifa movement. What is going to happen post this particular month is not a part of this debate. We win at that particular point in time. But moreover, on a comparative basis, the government has not given you a single reason to tell you why Antifa is not succeeding in today's state of affairs. They have not given you a simple reason to state why any other movement like the Occupy movement or the BLM is succeeding at that particular point in time. This movement is uniquely positioned to succeed. Extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you so much. Points have been noted. Would the opponent team like to raise a point of order or a point of personal privilege? Okay.
I just have one point of order. The speaker, the leader of the opposition, first stated in his constructive speech that the FBI director said it's not a terrorist organization, and then conveniently, based on the next 2 speeches, switched his words to it's not a violent body. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Judge, I'm sorry, participant, you cannot re-answer a point of order.
I don't think this deserves clarification. I'll take that into advisement. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much. With that, we move on to the last speaker for the match. The Prime Minister, the floor is all yours to start your rebuttal. You can start whenever you're ready.
So prevention is better than cure, right? And it's easy to disregard what could happen in the future when you haven't seen it yet. When you haven't seen the violence that can happen, you happily disregard it. But all the measures that were put forth by the proposition were to mitigate the effects of the Antifa. We are not saying that we believe the Antifa is right. First of all, we said there is no fascism. That was our claim, thus disregarding all you have said about Antifa being a right movement. Apart from that, we have repeatedly noticed that opinion was taken over fact. Now, we defined fascism according to the University of Cambridge based on what political scientists and individuals who have studied peace have written. Instead, the opposition went ahead and redefined fascism on the basis of opinion instead of fact. Now, with regards to the term mild violence, right? Repeatedly, the speeches mentioned mild violence, but you reduced all of it to a slap on the face. At no point did we say that's all that happened, because you completely disregarded my speech where I referred to Molotov cocktails, clubs being used, and at one point, a rifle being fired and a life being taken. And apparently you can say this and this to disregard a human life, but the fact is a human life is invaluable, all right? Whether you decide that you need to take a certain degree of measure to combat inequality, not fascism, that does not justify making a movement to stoop to the level of inequality that you are trying to fight in the first place. Apart from this, we at no point raised hypothetical scenarios. Our speeches were meant to be listened to in sync with each other. I set a base and the member of the government fulfilled the base with his points. Now, apart from this, there is a very simple fact that there is a difference from self-defense and outright violence. Repeatedly, you have tried to change the narrative of what we have said by saying that we only spoke that self-defense is what was the violence that was involved, wherein it is a well-known fact and a well-published fact in newspapers. I can quote to you The Atlantic, I can quote to you ABC, as well as BBC. There are 3 news channels, as well as Vox and Online News Port, okay, which have clear reports of the Antifa being responsible for propagating violence, not necessarily at neo-Nazi rallies only. We understand the point that yes, at a neo-Nazi rally, violence in the form of self-defense and a slap is acceptable, but that is not what we are referring to when we talk about violence. You cannot change the narrative of the debate on the basis of what you see fit as an opinion when it's actually a fact. Apart from this, now a terrorist organization, right? So we stated that this is the definition of terrorism, and what the Antifa does is in sync with it. So the nature of the Antifa is that of terrorism. Now, the only reason we refrain from calling it a terrorist organization is because we do not want to be factually incorrect and state that something that's not organized enough to be an organization, is a terrorist organization. And unlike what the opposition so freely decided to change their opinion and change their stance and try to rephrase what we said, we actually plan to stick by what we said. Making the judge attempt to reinterpret what we have said is wrong on your part, simply because what we have said is to mitigate the rise of Antifa. The topic is not whether we are for Antifa or against Antifa. The topic is whether we regret the rise of Antifa. We interpret this very openly as a nature that this rise has taken. The nature that this rise has taken is violent. The reason Black people are shot on the streets has nothing to do specifically with fascism. Taking that out of context, cherry picking facts for the sake of proving your argument is completely unfair, and anyone can prove that God is not real or God is real on the basis of any religious text if they decide to take things out of consideration or out of context. With that, I'm extremely proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, participant. Points have been noted. Is there a point of order or a point of personal privilege that the opponent team would like to raise? Go ahead.
I have two actually. And these are like classic point of orders, quote unquote style. Right. The first is that, am I audible?
Yeah.
So, right. In their reply speech and also in their prime minister's speech, we have two statements, and I quote, "There is no fascism," and I unquote. Their DPM said, and I quote, "Fascism exists, but neo-Nazi opinions are also invalid," unquote. Two opposing opinions presented in two different cases with respect to whether fascism exists or doesn't exist in two different speeches. I'll follow up with the second point of order also. Second point of order, their DPM said, and I quote, "Non-violence is the way to go. Violence cannot be acceptable," and I unquote. In their reply speech, they say, and I quote, "Violence is acceptable in a neo-Nazi rally in the form of slapping, and it's not acceptable when you do it outside of that," and I unquote.
Okay, Judge.
We'll take it one by one. Okay. So the first one was with respect to, I think the Prime Minister wants to answer that. I'll give you 15 seconds to just clarify that, please.
So again, the opposition took it out of context because I did not state fascism does not exist, period. I said fascism does not exist in America, period. And that is the stance we took, wherein he took it out of context to just say fascism does not exist and that fascism does exist.
Okay.
That's not
No, I meant in US only. I meant in US only.
No cross talk, please. No cross talk.
All right,
please.
very sorry.
Yes, Mr. Prime Minister, I'll take that into advisement. And second PO, I think the member of the government wants to clarify that. I'll give 15 seconds.
Can the leader of opposition reframe the PO once again? So that I can answer?
I'll repeat that if the judge would allow.
Please do that. Very, very precise, sir.
Very precisely. In the reply speech, their prime minister said, and I quote, "Slapping or any other form of violence is acceptable in a neo-Nazi rally," literally the word accepting. However, it's not accepting if in case you do it and incite it in any other place apart from the rally, and I unquote. Their DPM said, "Violence of any sort is not acceptable and neo-Nazi opinions are invalid in nature." In response to the POI I asked, it's on verbatim.
Right. So the Prime Minister said that violence in the form of self-defense is acceptable, not violence. And neo-Nazi opinions still do not matter. That's what I stand with.
Okay. Okay, sir. No. That's enough.
Okay. Thank you so much, participants. With that, we come to the end of this debate. For me, it was a really heated and very interesting to hear both sides of the coin. So I was really intrigued with both the statements that was made. I'm pretty sure the judge has a lot of feedback and comments make regarding that. Over to you, sir.
Guys, I think we can go off formality here, and I'll just be very casual with you guys. So primarily what I think is, see, this topic is very, very complex, right? So primarily you have issues like what is fascism, what is violence, whether violence is acceptable or not. But primarily what we're dealing with here is that the Antifa is a very, very far left organization that operates within the United States of America. Okay. You find that both Democrats as well as conservatives are against the Antifa. If you see Joe Biden is against the Antifa, he's very open about his opinion that he's against the Antifa. So if you have liberals as well as conservatives against a particular I won't say organization, but an ideology of sorts, I think that is amounting to a far left organization. So a far left organization is absolutely debatable. You can debate left, right, and center regarding how a far left system works. Okay, that's the first thing. Okay, secondly, whether fascism is present or not, that was a brilliant argument that was brought in by the Prime Minister in his speech that fascism does not exist in the first place. See, I felt that was a very good thing that you could start off by saying if it doesn't exist, then where is the concept of an Antifa? Very good, sir. I like that argument a lot.
Thank you, sir.
But secondly, with respect to the aspect of violence, uh, see the opposition dealt it very. I would say it was very tactful move because openly advocating violence will not be acceptable. At the same time, Antifa as such is a whole ideology which is based upon a bit of violence, right? So I think that is where the debate really comes out in that perspective. So how much of violence can be accepted? How much cannot be accepted? Okay. See, now the Antifa would be what is known as the extremists in the independence struggle. You could say that. See, you could say Chandrasekhar Azad and uh, Bhagat Singh were all extremists who believed that violence was the way to go. And for that matter, even Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. So all these people believed that violence is the way out of things. But over there, the argument was very straightforward. You had an imperialist government. You had them oppress the people. You had them do things that were atrocious, and therefore they were justified. But with respect to the United States of America, that is again unclear. And that is the point that was raised by the Prime Minister in his speech, that where is the fascism for you to have an Antifa movement itself? Okay. So, in my opinion, I think that it was a brilliant debate on both the sides. I really enjoyed. And Mr. Vishnu, your speech was very uh, aggressive in terms of how you wanted to put your point forth. And I think I really enjoyed how you did it. And Mr. Deepansh, you as well, I think both of you had a brilliant chemistry regarding how you wanted to bring this debate out. And I think it worked out in your favor as well. And great points of order, guys, points of information as well. I just have one small, I would say, a suggestion I could give to Mr. Vishnu here is that, sir, I think to your team as such, please do not bring in first names when you're debating. You are the member of the government or the leader of the opposition or the member of the opposition. And when you're referring to your teammate, please refer to them as such and not by their first name. This is a very technical thing. But when you start debating in better higher circuits, I think this is a point which they might even mark you negatively for. That's why I'm telling it to you. When you refer to your teammate, refer to them by the position that they are holding and not by their first names. And I think this was a really good thing. And sir, regarding how you brought the motion into perspective, I think I really enjoyed that, Mr. Deepansh. It was a brilliant move, I think, because see, again, you are right. The motion says that this was regrets that the Antifa was coming up, but it does not talk about this house believes that Antifa should be altered to suit the perspective of Americans today. That is not the motion. That point was really good. I really liked how you brought that out, and it was a very technical debate, guys. I honestly I learned a lot using your arguments, and it enhanced my own knowledge about the issue as such. I really appreciate you guys for arguing this out, and this is going to be again a tough decision for me to decide who is going to win this debate because, as I stated, each side has its strong points, each side has its negatives. So it's going to be a very, very small margin how one of you is going to win this debate. It's going to be, if it was possible, I'd say both of you could go to the finals, but I don't think that's possible today. So thank you so much for making me in this position. This is a great position to be in because it means that I enjoy the debate so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
I'm glad, Judge, that you enjoyed the same. Even I'm just speechless to say what more can I give regarding the same. So I'll just end stating that this is the conclusion of the debate. Thank you so much, both teams, for participating. I'm pretty sure you guys had a great experience taking part in our parliamentary debate. Again, thank you so much for participating. We'll let you know who goes on to the finals soon. But until then, stay safe, take care. Don't stop debating. I'm pretty sure you guys enjoy doing the same as well. So take care, stay safe, have a great weekend. Goodbye, guys.
Thank you, Rishabh.
You're welcome.